Now, I've actually avoided making this video for a long time because I really don't want to participate in something that I think is silly. But a lot of people have been asking about this video. They've been asking questions about it. And the subscribers on the channel, they wanted my opinion on it. And I'm going to give you my opinion. And hopefully it'll help you determine whether you guys want to believe in it or not believe in it, or you can do what you want. I've looked into this issue. I've watched a lot of videos on this to see what the heck these people are talking about, and I'm going to give you my opinion on it. And I drew some stuff here. We're going to run down it. We're going to go over it a little bit, and we'll see where this goes. I'm going to give you some simple things here. There are some things that I actually agree on, some things that I don't agree on, and I'm going to explain to you what I've seen over the 22 years of hunting that I have done. Now, the idea here is where you create summer food, spring, summer food, you suck in all these deer and it pushes the bucks away. Now, I don't necessarily believe that. I've never really seen that before in my entire life of hunting. So there are some things that I agree on, but I think that this is man-made. It's created by what we do with habitat work. Let's go over it. So I drew this diagram here, and it's generally, if you get into ag country, it's what you see on properties. Here is a property that is managed. It's got a plan, habitat plan there, and all around here you have just woods, ag, woods and ag. The idea here is that, let's say this is your property, it's 40 acres or so, and you have a food plot, and I guess from what people are talking about is if you create bedding close to food, you stack deer behind that. You create bedding around that food, does bed close to food. That's pretty common. You see that in areas where you have a food plot and such. Does don't like to move very far. They will bed around that food. But the idea is if you place bedding there, you can stack deer back to back to back. It's funny the way that works. And sometimes that may be true, and sometimes it isn't. It depends on the property. And I see the overemphasis of people trying to create buck bedding, where I've seen videos where guys are actually raking out the leaves, and they're actually taking shovels, shoveling the ground out down to bare dirt, and actually leveling the ground to try to get a buck to bed in a specific spot. To me, that is funny. You don't need to do that. Sometimes it may work and sometimes it doesn't. No matter what you do on a property with bedding, a deer is still going to bed where it wants to bed. Will it bed where you try to create it? Maybe so. Anytime you do habitat improvement work on your property, you are going to draw in more deer, bucks and does. Deer are drawn to the most palatable food source in the area. So when you start creating a manicured food plot, that food plot is manicured. What I mean by that is it's specifically fertilized, it's specifically limed according to a soil sample, and that crop that's growing in it is going to be more tasty and more palatable than anything else in the woods. Are deer going to focus on that 100%? No, because they need a variety of food. So that's why it's important to have browse and such on your property. But when you do that type of stuff, habitat improvements on your property, food plots, bedding or whatever, but when you do that, you are naturally going to draw in more deer. That's common sense. Deer are going to come from hundreds of yards away, a mile away, because you're creating this extra food source. When you do that, yes, you are going to need more food because the deer are going to browse that down. The idea also is that down here, I drew this. This is what I agree on. But number one is more food, more deer. Of course, that's common sense. The more food you have, the more deer you have. Number two, less food, less deer. It's common sense. The less food you have, the less deer you're going to have. The more deer or more food you have, the more deer you have. Bucks and does. You're going to draw that in. Each property is going to have a different buck to doe ratio. Okay? Big wood settings, Most time you have a lot of deer in those woods, a lot of does and stuff, and you're going to draw them into your property. I hunted a property for 5 years and managed, and there was times where, you know, I had 15, 20 does in a food plot feeding at one time, and guess what they were feeding with? Lots of bucks. Okay, you know, there might have been 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 bucks in the field at the same time, and the bucks and the does, they're together. Now, do deer like space? They do like space. Sometimes when you have too many deer, it can create a situation where the does are actually fighting, and you know, they don't want to be close together. That's why it's important in huge open fields. You can create separate food plots within that field with screening and such, because the does, you know, they like to be, you know, separate. They don't like to see each other. Same with bucks sometimes, but to say that creating more food is actually pushing bucks away, I've never seen that before in my entire life. I don't believe in that. It may happen in some places, I guess, but I've never seen it from multiple states that I've ever hunted in. And there's some situations here that I also want to go over. Is number one is a 1/4 acre. Now, does it make sense for you to plant a spring summer food plot on your property if you are in ag country and you're planting a 1/4 acre? Probably not. You can eliminate that summer food, because what's the point of trying to feed a deer on your property, your 40 acres, when you have hundreds of acres of ag around? What is your 1/4 acre plot going to do? Not much. What you should be doing is improving that soil and not trying to feed the deer. So improving it by rotations of buckwheat or something like that to work on your soil to lead into the fall. Number two is bedding. What I mean by this is when you try to micromanage a food plot or say a small property, this problem is on small properties from what I've seen, you know, on video wise. It's when you take say a 20 acre, a 30 acre, 40 acre, 50 acre property, and you try to micromanage that with strategic food plots, you create the problem of a so-called doe factory, because you're micromanaging it. You're taking bedding areas, placing it in strategic spots. You just created a home for does to come in. You created a home for extra does to come in on your property, and then all of a sudden you have a palatable food source, and you suck all these does in because you have bedding. Not every property needs bedding. I think people try to focus too much on bedding, and it creates the so-called doe factory. And that's where it comes from. I think that it's man-made. It's not something that happens naturally. It's when you do all these improvements, and then you throw the bedding in there, and then you suck all these deer close to bedding. And then on your property, I guess strategically, if you try to make buck bedding areas, you know, the bucks are going to bed back in the back, so-called. And to me, a buck is going to bed where it wants to bed. Does some properties need bedding? Yes, they do. But on super small properties, creating bedding areas, I don't think is the way to go. Usually on those larger properties, you can put your emphasis on bedding areas that way, on larger properties. But on those super small properties, when you try to create that bedding around food and things like that, yes, you're going to suck deer into those bedding areas, and then boom, they only have to move 50, 100 yards to a food plot, and all of a sudden you see, you know, 15, 20 does in a food plot, and all of a sudden you have a so-called doe factory. It has nothing to do with, you know, a doe factory. It's just the habitat improvements that you're making. You're going to draw more deer in. Think about that. Number three, spring and summer. You know, spring and summer food. Deer need different habitat for different times of the year. During the spring and summer, bucks do not want to be in super thick areas because they have velvet, right? They don't want to bang that around. I just made a video earlier in the week about cattails, you know, cover for deer and cattails that's on your property, because I mentioned in that video, bucks do not want to go in there during the summer because they're in velvet. The cattails are very thick. They don't want to be in there. They want to be in areas that's cool, has a cool breeze, you know, that can that they don't have to bang their antlers around on. So they need different, you know, habitat for different times of the year. Now, I've also, you have to understand, is a buck, apparently, you know, if you make a spring and summer food plot and you have that deer on your property in the spring and summer, apparently it's not going to be there in the fall if you create spring and summer food plots. That's completely false. A deer, like I mentioned earlier in this video, a deer is going to go where the most palatable food source is. When you start creating that, you're going to draw those deer in. If you eliminate your spring and summer food, you're doing yourself a disservice on your property. And to say that planting spring and summer food plots has zero nutritional benefit to the deer, you're lying to yourself. It's completely false. You can improve the deer herd, and I've shown that on 100 acres. Planting spring and summer food plots, you eliminate or increase the deer's body weight, antler size. I've shown that. The ribs go away. But again, if you're just doing a 1/4 acre in ag country, you're not doing much. If you're planting food plots in big wooded areas that the food is limited, closed canopy forest, you start planting food plots spring and summer, you're going to increase the herd, the nutritional value to that herd, and you're going to start bringing that body weight up on that deer. It's just common sense. Lack of food, more food that you put in there, manicured crops, you're going to increase the nutritional, you know, value to those deer. And it can be done. I've seen it. Number 4, again, big wood settings. If you're in that big woods area and it's closed canopy, you're lacking food, you start putting food plots in, you're going to suck those deer in to your property, and that's not a bad thing. You know, if you plant food, you're going to have more deer. I know when I go hunting, I want to see more deer. I want to see wildlife. And that's what's going to happen when you start planting food plots on your property, especially spring and summer. What is the difference in not having those does on your property in the spring and summer compared to having them in the fall? So if you're planting spring and summer food plots, you have does there, what's the problem? Let them feed on your food plot. You know, if you eliminate that food, the deer are going to go elsewhere. You plant fall food plots, deer is going to come in there. What's the difference, right? So the idea of a doe factory, I think where this came from is habitat work. When you're trying to micromanage these super 10, 20, 30, 40 acre food properties, and you try to micromanage those bedding areas around that food, yeah, you're going to suck more deer into those food plots because you have bedding so close to that. And all of a sudden we can come up with this idea of a doe factory to sell the idea, whatever it is, right? But bucks and does do bed together. I've seen it many times. Mature bucks, they bed with does. Sometimes you will see in high pressure areas where the buck does bed further away from, you know, it wants to get away, but it's mainly human intrusion. From what I've seen, you know, a mature buck does not want to see humans. They're going to be more calm around other deer than humans. Deer interact together. They live together. It's what they do. So the idea of this doe factory does not make sense. I've never seen it before in my entire life. There's some people out there that agree with it and some don't. I'm going to continue to plant spring and summer food plots. I've never ran into this issue where planting them is pushing bucks off the property. You're doing yourself, I believe, a disservice if you don't plant spring and summer food plots, depending on the area that you're in, depending on your property, depending on what's around it. If you're in huge ag setting, okay, and you're planting a 1/4 acre food plot, you're probably not doing much. If you're in big wood settings where you don't have much food, closed canopy, and you start planting food plots, you're only going to benefit them, the wildlife, deer and other wildlife as well. So hopefully I explained this well to you guys. You guys can determine what you want to do, whether you believe it or not. Me personally, I do not believe in it. I'm going to continue to plant spring and summer food plots because I like to feed the deer and the wildlife. Again, depending on the habitat, if they have enough food or they don't have enough food. The ribs are showing they don't have enough food. I made several videos throughout the past couple weeks leading up to this, but you know, we'll leave it up to you, and you guys can do what you want. So leave a comment down below and give the video a thumbs up. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you believe in. I'll see you guys on the next video. Thanks for watching this video, guys. If you want more information on food plots, soil samples, and habitat management, click this video right here on the screen. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you guys are new.